Good morning, everybody. It's me, Patrick Duffy. You're on my Instagram account, so you know that. But today is the first day of our super exciting program for fashion and the oceans, and I'm so pleased to have you here. We have an incredible program that you can check out at Global Fashion Exchange .org/ World Oceans Day 2020. So you can see all of our super exciting guests and the wonderful lineup that we have that spans the globe with all of our wonderful collaborators. I want to first off say thank you to the collaborators for putting the program together. That's, hi, there's Carrie, she's joining. Eco Shaker, Peace Boat US, and Creators for Change, Alexei Lubomitsky, my dear friend and wonderful partner on this Giada. And we're going to get this started with our very first guest, Carrie Summers from Fashion Revolution. She's going to talk to us today about the plastic problem, how we can help the oceans, and we're going to get some really great insights from her. So I'm going to welcome her in a second. Let's see if she's here. Good morning.
Hello, Patrick. Good afternoon from England.
Yes. Good afternoon, good morning from Minnesota. How are you in England? How are things? It's nice to see you again.
Good. Yes. No. Things are really good, actually. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to chat with you, me personally, and our entire community. We've been so excited for this. And we're so excited for the conversation about the oceans and all of your wonderful insights. So yes, everybody, here's Carrie Summers. Put your hands together, co-founder of Fashion Revolution, and also we're super excited to learn about what you're doing with eXXpedition. So yeah, let's just dive right in. So yeah, so tell us about eXXpedition, a women-led initiative that travels around the world where you have a mission to save the oceans, which makes a lot of sense that we're talking about this for our Oceans Day discussion. But tell us about what your involvement is there and what happens on those wonderful voyages.
Exactly. I mean, I started sailing, oh gosh, about 30, slightly more than 30 years ago, and just, fell in love with sailing and tall ships, and did the tall ships race and went sailing in the Caribbean, sailed across the Atlantic in a very ropey topsail schooner, and didn't really sort of start sailing again until I saw eXXpedition. I thought, what a fantastic initiative, women-led sailing expeditions to investigate ocean plastic pollution and the toxic chemicals in the ocean as well. And they'd done a number of them previously. So they'd done I think the North Pacific, the Great Lakes, they'd done around Britain. And I was kind of keeping an eye out, mostly for my daughter, Sienna, thinking it would be a great thing to send her on. And then when I saw they launched this round the world voyage and I looked at the legs and it was just like, okay, I'm signing up
That's so
for this one. And I mean, it was, I guess it's just that, once you've been at sea and once you've spent days and days without being able to see land, there's something really addictive about that. But also, it was an amazing opportunity to find out more about that huge problem of ocean plastic pollution and to take my observations and the findings back to some of the main polluter, which is the fashion industry and the clothes that we wear every day, which is the biggest source of global microplastics in our ocean. I mean, I still find that staggering, not to mention all the chemicals in our clothing as well.
Well, Carrie, what was it? Okay, so let's go back to that. I'm super fascinated by this. And let's go back to that beginning of the journey. First of all, what was going through your mind when you were out there? Like, did you have a really big understanding about, I mean, I know we've been reading a lot about microplastics polluting the oceans, but do we really have a concept of what that was? And did this journey and you taking this journey open your eyes to the magnitude of it in a different way? What was that like at the beginning and the onset, and what changed for you there?
It definitely opened my eyes to it in a different way. I mean, there's nothing like actually seeing the problem yourself and actually learning about the different tests, the science that we were doing. Because as well, we collected sediment samples to see how much plastic was actually in the sediment settling when we were near to land. We collected water from the water column, and that will be the first ever global data set of plastic pollution from the water column. I mean, that was one thing that really astonished me, was in a way how little research has been done. You know, the fact that this is the first data set using the same methodology all around the world is really astonishing. And that's why it's so important, so that brands and policymakers know where better to act. I mean, I think one of the things that really astonished me was that we didn't see that much really visible plastic. There wasn't much plastic on the surface of the sea as I expected to see. And I kind of know that the gyres, you know, people think that they're these floating islands of trash. I knew that that wasn't true, but I expected to be able to see something. And so we sailed, I mean, it was just over 2,000 miles in the end. It was pretty, I wouldn't say rough. I mean, it certainly wasn't as rough as I'm used to. I think for some of the people who were more novice sailors, they found it pretty rough. Unfortunately, I don't get seasick at all. But, you know, it was relatively choppy, a big swell. And then we got into the South Pacific Gyre. Now, the gyres are these areas of, they're currents, and these currents bring the plastic in. And it was amazing. We got into the South Pacific Gyre after sailing about 1,700 miles. And, I mean, it was like looking into a blue swimming pool. I've never seen the ocean so calm. I mean, there was barely a ripple. We had to motor in the end because there certainly wasn't enough wind to sail. But it was great for the science because it meant we could spend, you know, all morning, all afternoon doing science and analysing the data, and it was dead calm. And you looked into this water and it was blue and pristine. You could send down the Niskin bottle for sort of 15 metres. You could see it going down. I mean, it looked like there was nothing, you know, nothing in that ocean apart from, you know, perfect, pristine creatures. And then we brought up the manta trawls, and every time, you know, we filtered it through these 2-3 different layers of filters, and every time there was more and more and more plastic, and there was these specks of red and orange and white and green and bits of black mesh and little spirals of sort of white, you know, maybe from plastic bags. And it was just, I felt like I was prepared, but at the same time, you know, just seeing it is heartbreaking, because, you know, it's just a tiny fraction that we're seeing. And we found 5 times more microplastic within the gyre, which was about 2 or 3 days worth of, maybe 3 days worth of experiments, than we did in the whole of the voyage outside of the gyre. 5 times more combined.
Oh my God.
So yeah, and this is one of the most remote areas of the Pacific Ocean. It's near to Rapa Nui, Easter Island, which is called the loneliest island in the world because it's the most remote inhabited island. This plastic doesn't come from Rapa Nui. This plastic comes from Southeast Asia and Australia and Latin America and the fishing boats.
So what you saw literally passing through your hands in the middle of nowhere was the effects of the fashion industry and the plastic and the pollution in the ocean. And that's just a tiny fraction of what the larger problem is, right? So knowing that, where do you even begin to start to address, in your opinion, start to address this problem? Because you're right, I don't think fashion and the impact of the oceans is a big enough conversation, and the oceans is a massive resource for the entire world. So where do you even begin?
We have to address it really through the 3 different channels, through citizens, through brands and retailers, companies generally, and through policy makers. And we need all 3 of those combining to really address these issues. I mean, certainly as citizens, you know, there's so much we can do. I'm sure we'll probably come on to it later, but, you know, talking about choosing our materials wisely and doing our research and washing responsibly. With brands and retailers, I mean, this is really important and useful data because it will show them where they can have the most impact. And, you know, brands can't do everything all of the time in every place. So it will show them, you know, which areas of the world they need to act in, what types of microplastics and polymers these are, and where they need to work in their supply chain to best address these issues. And then also, you know, we really need policymakers to be doing more, and we need more legislation to come in. I mean, it is starting to come in. So we've seen legislation passed recently in Sweden around toxic chemicals and imposing a tax on fashion companies regarding the toxic chemicals which they are using in the manufacture of their clothing. And we need to see this kind of thing being rolled out more broadly. We certainly need to see legislation around washing machine filters. So that needs to be essential, that we have to have effective microfiber filters fitted in our washing machines, because what happens is that these are so small, they go out into the water treatment plants. Most of them are too fine to be collected by the water treatment plants. And then the ones which are collected by those filters, most of that sludge that's collected in the treatment plants is then, I'm not sure if it's sold or given, but it goes to farmers to put on their fields as sludge, as a fertiliser. And then, of course, if those plastics are still out there in the land, it goes down into the water table and it goes out into the ocean. So one way or another, all of these plastics from our clothes are ending up in the ocean. So we have to have legislation as well, because this problem isn't going to go away on its own.
So the magnitude is so, you know, can you give us, I'm sure you learned so much on your voyage too, can you give us a little insight to people who are kind of new to the fashion and oceans impact conversation? What happens to the oceans when it's littered with plastic? What happens to that ecosystem? What are some of the effects if we keep, you know, kind of polluting and not addressing those issues? Like, can you give some insight into that from your...
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much. I mean, a lot of these plastics are being eaten, you know, they're being eaten by, as you know, as small as the zooplankton, and of course that's part of the food chain. So they're, you know, then being consumed by other creatures, and it's going up the food chain. And you know, we know that all of our fish are full of plastics, and we are eating them. And it's not just that, you know, it's in the water we're drinking. You know, tap water, bottled water is even worse. Every time we have a beer or water, a cup of tea, coffee, we're drinking plastic. And these plastics all contain chemicals as well. And, you know, these chemicals are, I mean, they're pervasive in the environment. They're in all of our bodies. It was really interesting. Emily Penn, who's the co-founder of eXXpedition, she had a blood test for 35 chemicals which are banned by the United Nations, and they found 29 of them in her bloodstream. And these include chemicals which are regularly used for the manufacture of clothing, like, you know, pesticides and flame retardants. And we know, you know, everything that makes clothing, you know, easy to care for or waterproof, you know, school uniforms. I just wrote a blog post on this. Everything that makes it easy for parents, you know, non-iron and easy care and stain resistant. These are all chemicals. And actually the clothing that we get, you know, certainly in the EU for like a kilo of textiles, it's usually taken around 500 grams of chemicals to produce that kilo of textiles. It can be up to 100% of the weight in the fabric that can have been chemical input into that fabric. So it's really astonishing how many chemicals are used. And I think it's safe to say that we know it's a huge problem, but we know there's not enough research at the moment as well. But what we do know is that a lot of them are sort of accumulative in our bodies, and that accumulation of chemicals is passed on particularly from mother to child in the womb. It can increase generation after generation, and it can not only affect our health. I mean, a lot of them are known to cause cancer, to impact on our kidney and our liver, but they can also impact on our fertility as well. Wow. They're endocrine hormone disruptors. And I think, you know, so many of these chemicals, like, you know, Teflon, Teflon was seen as being just, you know, this miracle chemical which was going to, you know, make our clothing stain resistant and, you know, mean that we can use it to cook with on frying pans. You know, it was in the 40s when it came in. People thought Teflon was wonderful, and then people started to say, well, actually, Teflon isn't so good, Teflon isn't so good, but it took a really long time. And then there was a voluntary phase out, which happened. And I think that's only been really in the last few years. I think it was about 2017 that most of the Teflon was voluntarily phased out. And then it's only been very, very recently, I think it was in 2020, when there's actually been a ban on those PFOAs, one of which is Teflon. So I think that shows how long some of these chemicals, how long it can take for some of these chemicals that people say they're fine, to then get them banned. And actually the new generation of chemicals which have replaced those PFOs, the PFAAs, there's a lot of concern that actually we're just replacing like with like, and so that they could be just as bad. Some people are saying they're even worse than the chemicals which they are replacing. So I think we need to be really careful about any of the chemicals. And these are on all of the plastics. They're on the plastics, they're in the plastics, they're inextricably melded in with all those plastics, and these are the plastics which are in our oceans and in our food and drink.
It's so crazy, Carrie, to think about the impact that this is having, not only on the oceans but even our own lives. And it's something that has not really been talked about. So give that information, and I think we need to have more and more of these conversations, and we'll be calling you back many times. Where do we begin as consumers? Where do we begin as people involved, either as consumers in the fashion industry and brands and manufacturers, to start turn the tide, so to speak, on this problem? I mean, it's just so big. With all of your experience with Fashion Revolution as well, kind of merging this with the ocean plastic conversation, it'd be great to hear what can we do as active citizens.
Yeah. I mean, I think we start in our homes. So we start when we buy clothing by checking the label and doing our research about the fabrics. And there's no easy choices at the moment. We're saying this is the problem with synthetics, so that's polyester, acrylic, nylon, but we know there's huge problems with conventional cotton as well, in terms of pesticide use, water, land use. So it's not like we're saying it's not binary, it's not black and white. It's a really complex issue, as are so many of the issues in the fashion industry. So do your research, choose your materials wisely. When you're washing your clothing, I mean, we're all washing our clothing far too much. So don't wash your clothes as much. When you do wash them, do short, cool cycles. Use liquid detergent and liquid fabric conditioner, and use a Cora ball or a guppy bag, and dispose of those fibres in the right place. So don't put those fibres into your composting or flush them down the toilet. Actually put them in the bin. So be responsible in terms of your washing. And then we can also really use our power and our voice to bring about change. And we know that brands and retailers are listening. We've heard from talking to the big fashion brands, they don't pay much notice to petitions. They typically think it's not their customers who are signing that kind of thing, but they really do listen when they get messages, emails from their customers, because these are the people who keep the brands going. So we've launched a new hashtag this year, what's in my clothes. So use the hashtag what's in my clothes and ask the brands and retailers to tell you what's in the clothing. I mean, at the moment, we've found that only 40% of brands are disclosing their restricted substances lists. That was in this year's Fashion Transparency Index. So that means 60% of brands don't tell us what chemicals are or aren't allowed into our clothing. So this is a really essential first step. We want brands to disclose their restricted substances list. I mean, this is where transparency, I don't think anyone can say that transparency is not important in this instance, because then we have the list and we can see what chemicals are allowed, and clothes can be tested to say, well, actually, this is not allowed in the clothes. So, we found this in the clothing. You need to go back to your manufacturers. So we should put pressure on brands and retailers to disclose their restricted substances list. And really, we should be putting pressure on our policymakers, because that information should be disclosed by law. And it should be disclosed. I don't know if it's possible on the labels, because it's there's so many chemicals. I mean, thousands and thousands. So it probably couldn't go on the label, but it certainly should be on the brand's websites.
And if it's not safe for us to wear against our skin, it's certainly not safe to go into the ocean, I'm guessing. So
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that issue with the airline uniforms with United and like Delta, some of the other ones. And even, I mean, some of them, it was a year after those uniforms had been brought in that people were still having allergic reactions, and they still couldn't wear them. And these are exactly the same chemicals. You know, every time we wash our clothes, these chemicals are coming off them and into the oceans.
you know, we actually have a question. I'm just going to take a quick peek here. It says, what happens to natural yarns with chemical dyes and pigments? So, you know, you have brands that are out there saying that they're using all these, you know, natural fibers, like 100% organic cotton, but yet they're using synthetic dyes. Is that an issue? Is that a problem? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, it depends on the type of dye. So most of our clothes, even if they are natural fibres, they certainly do all have chemicals. You know, cotton, wool, they all have chemicals. You know, even if it's natural dyes, you have the mordants, and not all mordants are good. You know, so you can't even say that using natural dyes is necessarily better. It has to be done in a responsible way. And that's where the disclosure is really important from the brands. I mean, if you buy organic, then that will certainly affect the dyes which are able to be used.
Mm.
So, I mean, you know, certainly if you're at all concerned, you should be going for the organic option.
Okay, thank you. So going back to the expedition, I'm super excited to know more about that. So what are some of the so we've discovered more some of your findings, which is plastic literally in your hands. So what are some of the conversations and the steps and the science behind the way forward? What are we looking forward to in terms of how to address this? Is there any ideas or any action plans in place to, I mean, is there a filter for the ocean? Is that even possible? Like what are we talking about here?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, there is no filter for the ocean. We can certainly collect some of the plastics on the surface, but in terms of the plastic which is in the ocean, I mean, at the moment, there's no way of collecting it. And you know, this plastic never goes away. I mean, it never biodegrades. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and it still ends up somewhere in the food chain. It just means that, you know, different creatures are going to be eating it. It's a real shame that, you know, because of COVID, eXXpedition has been delayed, and because of, you know, typhoon season and sailing and the wind, they've had to delay it by an entire year. So it's the voyage, the leg after ours, was I sailed from the Galapagos to Easter Island. So the leg from Easter Island to Tahiti took place just about. So it's going to be picked up in a year's time, sailing from Tahiti and doing the legs around Australia through Asia and back around Africa and back to the UK again. And then once that data is analysed, we will have a much better picture. And the data that's been collected so far is being analysed. It's back at the lab in Plymouth, and then we were collecting other data on board for other universities. I think University of Hawaii, University of Georgia. We were collecting, you know, air samples, because even in these remote places in the ocean, there's plastics in the air as well as in the ocean. So there was all sorts of different collections and data that we were gathering on board, which are being analysed at the moment. So hopefully there will be some preliminary information which I will be able to share at some stage in the near future.
Okay, you just said something mind-blowing, which I've been doing a lot of reading about, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. When you said there's plastics in the air, I think when you say that to most people, they have no concept, but a lot of that actually comes from the oceans. Can you explain why there's plastics in the air and why that happens?
Gosh, I'm not sure I can explain the science behind why there's plastics in the air, but I mean, there is just, you know, we know there's plastics everywhere. I mean, I talked to my husband recently, who runs Patricuti now, which is the brand I set up. And, you know, obviously with Fashion Revolution, I can't do two things, so he's taken it over. And as well as the Panama hats that Patricuti is famous for, in the winter we also have felt hats. And the wool felt, the wool for these hats comes mostly from Uruguay. And they're having real problems now with these hoods, which are the unblocked hats. So the wool comes in, and there's so much plastic in the sheep's wool, which is, clearly coming from the air and the sheep in remote areas of, Uruguay, northern Argentina, that it's actually starting to discolour the wool hoods for the felt hats because of the amount of plastic in the sheep's coats, which is really astonishing. So yeah, I mean, it's all around us. I'd be really interested to find out more about how much plastic was in these air samples. So we collected those. We had buckets up the mast several times during the voyage to collect that
I guess
plastic.
for me, it's not. It's I can't explain the science either, but I guess it makes perfect sense that these particles are so tiny. If it's going into the ocean, it evaporates with the water. It comes down in the rain. I mean, I've been reading about rainforests covered now in plastic. It's no longer about acid rain. It's about plastic rain. So, and it relates to everything that we see, feel, touch, and consume. So when we're going back to advocacy and where are we starting to direct our advocacy and our What's in My Clothes campaign, for instance, where should consumers really be targeting this advocacy? Is it about the brands? Is it about the supply chain? Is it about who are we to kind of target to help make this change with us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the best place for most people to start would be the brand, because brands have incredible power and brands do listen. I mean, it only takes between about 50 and 150 messages to a brand on a specific issue for that to get escalated up to be discussed at board level. That's really not very much for a large brand. So I think that shows the power that we have as customers of these brand. So that's where I'd start. And I'm sure all of us, even if we've got it in a clothes swap somewhere, we've probably all got some clothing from a fast fashion brand somewhere, maybe not. But find that clothing and show the label and ask that question, what's in my clothes, and ask the brand to publish their restricted substances list, or to let what chemicals are banned, what chemicals are permitted in the clothing, and start to put pressure on those companies. I mean, most of the most responsible companies will have restricted substances lists published, but as we've seen, so many companies are publishing very little. I've been fielding endless phone calls over the last 2 days about Boohoo, and mostly that's been about the social conditions, about the human rights abuses, about the low wages, about the lack of transparency. But at the same time, these are the companies who are producing, almost the entire production is plastic. And where is the responsibility for all of that plastic? And a lot of it is single-use plastic, which they're putting out onto the market.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really interesting point. Something to point out as well is that if a country that's handling the waste, for instance, in Ghana, they're filtering a lot of waste that comes from the UK fashion waste. If countries or municipalities don't have the infrastructure set up to notification manage their waste, then that's an issue that needs to be addressed as well. Because if we're sending our waste to places like Sri Lanka or Ghana or Latin America, and there's no way to properly dispose of it, then the option is dump it in the water, whether it's a river and then the river then goes into the ocean. So it's a huge conversation that we need to be having, and thank you so much for bringing that light. So not to end on a depressing note. What's the hope? I mean, you're such a source of inspiration and hope for so many people, as is eXXpedition and Fashion Revolution. Are there hopeful aspects of it that we can look to keep inspiring us to what's happening? Are there what is the good stuff that's happening? Can you share some of that?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that may be the most, one of the most positive things I found about the trip was the fact it was a multidisciplinary crew. So, I'm not a scientist, and we all came from different backgrounds and different disciplines. And I think we all need to work together to find solutions. And, you know, science has got narrower and narrower and narrower over the centuries. You know, I look at Humboldt, and I've read quite a lot about Humboldt recently. And, you know, he, you know, 200 years ago, he was talking about the impact of clothing on the environment, and the fact that, you know, the land was, I think he said it was, you know, barren, it was being, mined, you know, it was, people were exploiting it like a mine because of the hunger in the West for colourful clothing. And this was 200 years ago, but Humboldt used, you know, poetry and politics and art history. And we really need to rediscover that multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's so exciting for everybody listening, because whether you're, you know, an artist or a sculptor, or whether you're working in the industry, whatever your field is, we can all participate in trying to find solutions. And we need to reconnect, you know, the arts and the sciences, science with our emotions, so that we start to protect what we love. We can't all engage with the science, you know, it's really complicated, but we can all engage with, you know, the beauty of the oceans and that desire to protect it. So I feel like we need to really expand the conversation, and all of us listening, whatever our discipline and skills are, can all be a part of trying to find the solutions and to use our own skills to raise awareness. There's a new portal that's been launched by Emily Penn called Shift. I think it's Join the Shift on Instagram. And this is like encouraging everyone to find their own, you know, what's your shift? What's your key moment? What's going to change your habits? And how are you going to help to you know, be a part of this?
Thank you for the inspiration. So now I'm going to ask you for some tools and tips. So I'll just off the top of mind, I know we've talked about this before, but what are some great tools and tips? I know you mentioned for consumers, like a guppy bag is a really great idea. Can you just give us some insights to tools that we can look at, or campaigns to follow, like What's in My Clothes, or Instagram accounts that we can look at, or ways that we can educate ourselves? Any of your top tips that we can get a little insight on?
Oh yes, I mean definitely the Join the Shift is the new one. eXXpedition is expedition with two X's.
Okay.
So I think those are really great places to start. Fashion Revolution's Get Involved pack will have information about what's in my clothes. It was one of our key themes this year, sort of under the heading of composition. So that will give everybody ways to be involved. We have packs for citizens, brands and retailers. We even have a workplace activism pack now. So, you know, if you work in a fashion brand, it gives you some tools which you can use. If you really want to find out more information, we have a fantastic MOOC, a massive open online course at Fashion Revolution, which is running with FutureLearn. I think the next one is coming up imminently. It might have just started. So I think it's July to August, and it's running in 3-week sessions every 2 months. It's a free course, and it's called Fashion's Future and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Great.
So certainly that is you know, looking at the ocean. That's one of the issues that will be addressed in that course.
Absolutely. Well, we will be sure. We're gonna catch up with you after this live and get all that great information from you and share that out. And please definitely stay in close contact, because you're such a wonderful inspiration to us all. And we look forward to seeing more information from you and keeping up with you in your travel. So Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. All this wonderful information and all of your inspiration and hard work. We're just so inspired. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. It's always such a pleasure to see you and to talk to you and to have a conversation with you. You know that. So thank you.
Me too. I love it. I love it. I love it. So you'll be getting more taps from me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, please do. Please do. In the meantime, I'm off to the beach for the next 2 weeks with my daughter Sienna. So we'll be doing some beach cleans ourselves over the next few weeks as we get out to Devon.
Well, have a wonderful time. We'll be following you and giving you lots of thumbs up. And thank you again. Say hi to family. Thank you.
Will do. Bye.
Bye,
Lovely
Carrie.
to talk to you. Bye.
Oh, that's great.